They say love doesn't always knock loud. Sometimes it just slips in and stays. I'm Alex Lemon. These stories, they're about that kind of love. Tender, tangled, a little messy, but always real. So, settle in and let your heart listen. The Altar Betrayal. Chapter 1. The Man in the Mirror. I don't know who the hell that is, but that man ain't no pastor. Elder Morris whispered it under his breath, but the word sat heavy in the humid Baton Rouge air like sweat on a preacher's collar. He leaned forward in the second pew, eyes locked on the groom standing beneath the flowered arch at the front of St. Gabriel Baptist Church. The man wore an ivory suit so sharp it could slice through steel. He stood tall, smiling, composed, too composed, like he'd rehearsed every breath. Folks clapped as the organ played softly. Phones were out, flashes popping. Everyone was looking at love. Morris was looking at a lie. Outside, cicadas screamed from the oak trees like they were warning somebody. A soft breeze stirred the magnolia petals lining the walkway. Inside, the air was thick with perfume and expectation. Sister Jenkins had tears in her eyes. Deacon Harris wiped his glasses like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The pews were packed with half the black elite of Louisiana, all in gold and cream. But Morris couldn't shake the knot in his chest. Something was off. Something was deeply wrong. The groom, folks called him Pastor J, stood with his hands folded, nodding at guests like a celebrity preacher on a magazine cover. But his smile, it didn't reach his eyes. His eyes kept scanning the room, left, right, left again, like he was waiting for someone to walk in or for something to go terribly wrong. Tamara Johnson hadn't come down the aisle yet, but her voice echoed in Elder Morris's mind. "He's not like the others, Mr. Morris. He listens, he prays with me, he talks about purpose. Nobody's ever seen me like he does." That girl had a soft heart. Grew up in a house full of judges and lawyers, and still believed in soulmates and scriptures. Morris remembered when she was 9 years old, reading the announcements at church with her little braids bouncing. Now she was 32, head of the city's literacy fund, and ready to marry a man she'd only known for 6 months, and not just any man. A man who showed up out of nowhere with a story too smooth and a voice too sweet. 3 weeks ago, Morris had asked him something simple after service. "So, what part of New Orleans you said you from again?" Pastor J smiled and said, "Trem, sir. Born and raised." Morris nodded. "Oh yeah, what school?" The man blinked. McKinley High." That was the moment. Morris didn't say a word, just smiled and walked away. McKinley High was in Baton Rouge, not New Orleans. That's when the knot first formed in his stomach. Now, as the doors swung open and Tamara appeared at the back of the church, arm in arm with her father, the whole room turned to magic. She looked radiant. Simple silk gown, no veil, just curls falling like rivers down her shoulders. Her eyes searched forward, locked on the man she thought was her future. Jay's smile widened. Too wide. His hands twitched slightly. Morris noticed everything. Tamara's father, Judge Harold Johnson, walked slow, measured, proud. But Morris caught the slight tension in his jaw. Even the judge had doubts. You could see it in how he gripped her hand a little too tight, how he nodded to the crowd but didn't smile. Tamara's thoughts danced between nerves and joy. She loved this man. She loved the way he held her during prayer, the way he said her name like it was scripture. And yet, last night, something had tugged at her. A dream, maybe, or maybe the silence that fell between them when she'd asked him where his mama was buried. He'd looked away and said, "That's not something I talk about, baby." She'd let it go. Love wasn't perfect. Everybody had scars. But Morris knew the difference between a scar and a mask. As Tamara stepped onto the white runner and the organ rose higher, a soft gasp escaped someone in the back. Jay flinched, just for a second, but Morris saw it. That split second of panic in the eyes, like a man who thought the past might kick the door in at any moment. He looked around. Still no interruption, still no one shouting, "Stop the wedding," but the air felt like it might crack. Pastor Reed, standing with his Bible at the altar, was all smiles on the surface. But inside, he felt it too, something in the spirit, something unsettled. He remembered when Jay had asked, real casually, if they could maybe skip the "speak now or forever hold your peace" part of the ceremony. Said it always made folks nervous. Reed had laughed then, but now the memory came back with a chill. As Tamara reached the front and placed her hand in Jay's, Morris closed his eyes. He wasn't going to make a scene, not yet. But he knew what he'd seen, and he'd seen enough men like this in his lifetime to know. Wolves don't howl when they hunt. They smile. The sun outside dipped slightly behind the clouds. A shadow moved across the stained glass windows. The choir hummed soft. Somewhere in the pews, a child started crying. Small signs, little cracks. The man in the mirror looked like love, talked like love, dressed like love. But what was hiding behind that mirror? And how long before it shattered? Chapter 2. Sundays best ain't always clean. 3 months before the wedding, Tamara sat on the hood of her daddy's old Cadillac, sipping sweet tea and staring at the sun sinking over the rooftops of Spanish Town. It was one of those Baton Rouge evenings where the air smelled like magnolia and the world felt too still. Her phone buzzed. She smiled. "Good evening, First Lady," read the message. That's what he called her. First Lady, like she was already wearing that title. She rolled her eyes, but her heart fluttered. Jay was smooth, too smooth sometimes, but he knew how to say the right thing, especially when her mind got loud. And her mind had been loud lately. At first, it all felt like a miracle. They'd met in the most unlikely place, after service brunch at a small church in Atlanta, when she was in town visiting her aunt. He spoke about God like he was a person he'd had coffee with that morning. Told her she was chosen, not just beautiful, but born for something holy. He called her Queen before he even knew her last name. Tamara had heard game before. She'd dated the college boys with big dreams and small hearts, the polished lawyers with fast mouths and faster cars. But Jay looked her in the eyes. Jay asked about her purpose. He prayed with her. And that hit different. Still, doubt crept in like smoke under the door. One night, 2 months before the wedding, they sat on the back porch of her family home, wrapped in a blanket. The crickets chirped loud. The moonlight brushed her cheeks silver. Jay rested his hand on hers, warm and steady. "You ever wonder why God brought me to you?" he asked. She nodded. "Yeah, every day." He smiled. "It's 'cause you needed someone who saw the storm and stayed." But she remembered the pause that followed. It was too long. Like he'd recited that line before. Like he didn't mean it the way it sounded. The next morning, her father asked the question she'd been too scared to form. "Where's this boy from again?" Tamara hesitated. "New Orleans, or maybe Mobile. He's moved around a lot." Her father raised an eyebrow. What church ordained him?" "Daddy, no, baby girl. You know I ask 'cause I care. This man about to lead you. You better know who's leading him." She got defensive. Said Jay didn't like to talk about his past. Said some things were painful. Her father didn't push, but Tamara saw the worry in his eyes. Same worry that had been growing in her own chest like a weed. And then came the first real crack. At her cousin Keisha's birthday, the whole family was out in the backyard, laughing over barbecue and spades. Somebody passed Jay a plate of ribs and joked, "Hope you still remember Louisiana cookin' after all that Atlanta fame." Jay laughed. "Man, ain't nothing like a beignet from the French Quarter right by Magazine Street." Morris was sitting across the table. He raised an eyebrow. "Magazine Street don't run through the Quarter," he said. Jay froze for half a breath, then chuckled. "My bad, man. I get turned around when I'm back home." But that moment stuck with Morris. It stuck with Tamara, too. Later that night, she asked Jay, "Where'd you say your mama lives now?" Jay got quiet, looked off into the dark. "She passed a while back," he said. Tamara blinked. "But I thought you said y'all talked last Sunday." He stood up, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "You think too much, baby. You're just not used to a man who don't lie." But it was already too late. The lie had touched the air. It floated there, quiet, dangerous, like a match near gasoline. Weeks passed. Jay swept her back into the dream. Romantic dinners, verses sent by text, random visits with fresh flowers. He even came to help her read to kids at the city library one Saturday, sitting cross-legged in a suit reading The Lion and the Mouse like it was scripture. People loved him. The church board approved him. Her friends called her blessed. But the whispers kept crawling in. The night they picked out wedding invitations, Tamara paused at the kitchen table, holding a gold-trimmed sample in her hand. "You sure you ready?" she asked. Jay smiled, leaned in, kissed her fingers. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." But when she looked into his eyes, she saw a shadow. Not doubt, not fear, it was calculation. As the cicadas sang outside and the air got thick again, Tamara's heart pulled back just a little, just enough to feel the difference. It was a still summer night, but her soul knew the storm was coming. Something about this love wasn't clean, not all the way, and not every man who quotes scripture's been touched by the Spirit. Some just memorized the words. Chapter 3. Dust Don't Stay Buried. The first time Pastor Reed saw her, she was standing in the rain outside St. Gabriel's, wearing an old gray shawl and clutching something to her chest. She didn't move when the thunder rolled or when the deacon offered her an umbrella. She just stood there, eyes fixed on the church door like it was the gate to heaven, or maybe hell. "Ma'am, you all right?" Pastor Reed had asked, stepping outside, his voice calm but watchful. She looked up slow, water sliding down her wrinkled face. "I need to speak with someone in charge. Someone who ain't fooled by smooth talk and pretty smiles." He led her inside, gave her a towel and warm tea. She sat in the tiny office near the back of the church, the old ceiling fan clicking overhead. Her name was Miss Leona, and what she pulled from her coat changed everything. It was a photograph. Bent at the corners, faded by years, but clear enough. Two young men, arms slung over each other's shoulders. One of them was the man the city now called Pastor J. The other was her nephew Curtis. "That's my sister's boy," she said, voice trembling. "Curtis Jamal Rivers, and that man up there wearing white and preachin' pretty. That ain't him." Pastor Reed blinked, heart tightening. "Ma'am, are you saying he's using someone else's name?" She shook her head. "No, baby. I'm saying he's using his own, but he's pretending to be somebody else. That boy was no pastor, not when I saw him last." She told him about the women, about the money, about how Curtis would roll into towns, put on his suit, charm the single ladies with scripture and sad eyes, and then disappear. "He knows just enough church to sound like he lived in it, but all he ever did was use it." Pastor Reed sat back in his chair, cold sweat creeping down his spine. He remembered Jay's sudden request to skip the "speak now" or forever hold your peace moment. He remembered the vague stories, the contradictions. It wasn't just a hunch anymore, it was confirmation. That same night, he called Elder Morris, told him to come to the church, brought out the photo, the tea-stained towel, the testimony. Morris stared at the picture in silence for a long time. This, the same man I seen holding Tamara's hand last week. Pastor Reed nodded. Same smile, same voice. Morris's face darkened. Then Lord help us, 'cause that girl's walking straight into a lion's den wearing perfume and a blindfold. The two old men sat there, weighed down by truth. The kind of truth that don't feel like freedom, but like a chain breaking right next to your soul. You think she'll believe us? Reed asked. Morris looked out the stained glass window, watching the streetlights blink through the falling rain. She in love. That's a spell stronger than anything else I know. But sometimes God don't break the spell. He just hands you a match and waits to see if you got the nerve to strike it. Next morning, Pastor Reed tried to reach Tamara. No answer. No reply to the messages. She was busy with the final fittings, the guest list, the cake tasting. Caught in the whirlwind. So they watched. Waited. The second crack came a few days later, when Jay walked into the church office unannounced, smiling like a man with no worries. Just wanted to bless the building, Pastor, he said. Make sure the spirit stays heavy in here. Reed nodded slowly. Funny thing, you ever hear of a man named Curtis Rivers? For a split second, something flickered in Jay's eyes, barely visible, but real. Then he chuckled. Can't say I have, sounds like one of them old jazz musicians. Reed smiled back, matching his tone. Just a name that came across my desk. Thought I'd ask. Jay didn't flinch, didn't blink, just changed the subject like it was nothing. But that moment, that breathless 2 seconds, Reed saw it. The fear under the charm. The calculation behind the smile. That same day, Elder Morris made a phone call to someone he knew down in Atlanta. A retired pastor named Bishop Ellis who'd seen Jay preach once at a revival. Ellis called back that evening with one sentence that sealed it. That man told a story about losing his brother in Iraq. But I checked. Curtis ain't never had a brother. The lies were stacking like cards. And Tamara? She was decorating tables with candles and gold linen, still talking about love like it was enough. But love without truth don't last. It rots from the inside, slow and sweet, like fruit left too long in the sun. That night, Morris stood on his porch, staring at the stars. The air was thick and still, like the world itself was holding its breath. He thought of Tamara's mother, long gone, who used to sing gospel on Sunday and pray so hard the room would shake. He whispered into the dark, Lord, if you're watching, don't let that girl walk into fire wearing lace. A breeze passed through the trees, a whisper through the leaves. Some truths don't stay buried, some dust always finds its way to the light. Chapter 4. The Voice That Broke the Room. The sanctuary was glowing. Gold sashes draped the pews, white lilies spilled from the altar, and the stained glass cast soft rainbows across the polished tile. The air was heavy with perfume and gospel. It smelled like money and prayer. Outside, cicadas buzzed in the trees, heat hanging low like a warning no one heard. Tamara stood in the bridal suite, a small room tucked behind the choir loft, staring at herself in the full-length mirror. Her gown shimmered like river light, soft and flowing. No veil, just her curls falling over bare shoulders. But her eyes kept darting away from her reflection. She could feel it in her chest. Something was off. She couldn't name it, couldn't prove it, but it was there, like a tremble in the earth before it cracks open. Baby, her Aunt Diane whispered, adjusting a pearl earring. You sure about this? Tamara nodded too quickly. "Yes, ma'am, I love him." Aunt Diane watched her a moment. "Love's good, but love don't mean blindness." Tamara looked away. Her hands were trembling, so she clenched them into fists. Jay had been everything she prayed for, smooth, spiritual, intentional. But lately, when she held his hand, it felt colder. When he kissed her, it felt rehearsed. Last night, he told her, "After tomorrow, nobody can question what we have." But it didn't sound like joy, it sounded like strategy. Now, from behind the heavy church doors, the organ began to play. The soft, slow kind of song that made people cry even before they knew why. Tamara's father appeared in the doorway. He didn't say much, just held out his arm and waited. As they stepped into the aisle, 1,000 eyes turned toward her. Phones lifted. People gasped. She looked like a dream, but even dreams can turn. And Elder Morris felt that turn deep in his bones. He watched Jay standing at the altar, flashing that polished smile like it was glued to his face. Jay's eyes flicked across the room, twice, maybe 3 times, like he was waiting for someone to burst through the door. His shoulders were stiff, his hands clenched tight at his sides. The choir hummed. The pastor stood with his Bible. Tamara walked slow, graceful, beautiful, unaware of the storm gathering around her feet. When she reached the altar, Jay took her hands. His palms were sweaty. He whispered, "You're safe now." She didn't know why those words chilled her. Safe from what? Pastor Reed opened his Bible and began. The room quieted, thick with reverence. He spoke the vows line by line, steady and sure. People smiled. Someone wiped a tear. And then he paused. "If anyone here knows a reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony," he said, his voice loud and smooth, "let them speak now or forever hold their peace." Silence dropped over the church like a blanket of ash. A beat passed. 2. Then came the sound, the scrape of a wooden pew. All heads turned. Elder Morris rose slowly, like an oak tree shaking off a storm. His face was hard, steady, sad. "I do," he said. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Murmurs followed. Someone whispered, "Jesus." Another whispered, "Lord, no." Jay flinched. Tamara's hand tightened in his. She turned to Morris, her lips parting. "Morris?" she asked. Her voice cracked. But before he could speak again, the back doors creaked open. Another voice rang out, old, clear, and unafraid. "That man is not who you think he is." Heads snapped around. A woman stepped forward, dressed in faded brown, hair tied up, eyes burning like fire in dry grass. Miss Leona. "I watched that boy grow up," she said, walking down the aisle with a photo clutched in her hand. "His name is Curtis Jamal Rivers, and he don't belong in a pulpit, let alone at this altar." The room exploded in sound, cries, questions, anger, confusion. Tamara stumbled back a step, tears already forming. Jay stepped forward, hands raised. "Please, everybody calm down. This is a mistake. This woman's confused." But Pastor Reed held up a hand. "Son, enough." Jay's jaw tightened. He glanced toward the exit. "Don't," Morris said quietly. Miss Leona handed the photo to the pastor. 2 young men, same smile, same eyes. Reed turned to Jay. "You said your name was Jordan. You said you were from Treem. You lied." Jay looked at Tamara, then the crowd, then back at the photo. His shoulders slumped. "I didn't mean to hurt nobody," he said. "I just wanted a new life, a good life." Tamara took a step back, voiceless, exposed, her heart breaking in plain sight. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Who are you?" Jay's face was pale now. No charm, no defense, just a man with nothing left to sell. "I'm nobody," he said. "I just didn't want to be poor anymore." And just like that, the dream shattered. The organ stopped. The sanctuary fell still. Tamara turned and walked away. Veil never needed. Strength in every step. Somewhere in the back, a baby cried, and outside, the cicadas sang on, loud and holy. Chapter 5. The Unmasking. For a long second, nobody moved. The sanctuary hung in silence, like God himself had leaned in to hear what would happen next. The air was tight and sharp, thick with too many eyes and too little truth. Jay, Curtis, now without a title, stood beneath the altar flowers like a man stripped bare in a storm. His once white suit didn't shine anymore. It looked like fabric trying to hold a lie. Tamara didn't cry. Not yet. Her body was still. Her hand hovered just above her side like it forgot how to belong. Pastor Reed stepped forward, holding the photograph from Miss Leona, his voice steady and low. "Curtis," he said, calling the name that Jay never claimed. "Is there anything you want to say before this house gets any heavier with silence?" Curtis let out a dry breath, something between a cough and a laugh. He shook his head, eyes drifting over the stunned crowd. His smile was gone. What replaced it wasn't sorrow, not quite. It was surrender. "I came here to start over," he said, voice barely louder than the ceiling fan hum. "I was tired of being broke, tired of sleeping in cars, tired of being nothing to nobody. I saw her at that brunch in Atlanta, and she looked like a future I could step into." Tamara's lip trembled. Still no tears, just that cold, clean ache behind her ribs. Curtis looked at her now, eyes softer, almost pleading. "I didn't plan it at first. I really didn't. But once she smiled at me like that, once she said I made her feel safe, man, I wanted it to be true so bad I started believing it myself." In the third pew, someone muttered, "Shame." Another whispered, "Lord, forgive him." "I didn't fake the prayers," Curtis continued. "I meant every word, but the name, the job, the backstory, that was all stolen." Pastor Reed stepped back, his Bible still open in one hand. "You lied on sacred ground, son, but you still got time to tell the whole truth." Curtis swallowed hard. "I was never a pastor. I followed real ones, though, listened close, took notes, even worked behind the scenes at a church in Charlotte, learned how to move like one, talk like one. But I ain't never been ordained, never stood at no pulpit with a calling from God." Tamara finally looked up, her voice quiet but sharp. "Why me?" Curtis stared at her a moment, then said the words too late. "Because you believed in me before I did." That's when the first tear broke free. Not because she missed him, but because part of her still wanted to believe he could have changed. That, under the lies, maybe there was still something worth holding on to, but she knew better. She stepped back, one step, then another. "I would have loved you honest," she said. "I could have built a life with a broken man, but I can't build one on a fake." Curtis dropped his eyes, his shoulders sagged, and for the first time he looked small. Judge Johnson walked to his daughter and placed a hand gently on her back. She didn't lean into it. She stood on her own. Miss Leona watched from the back, eyes full of old pain and quiet wisdom. Pastor Reed cleared his throat. "This ceremony is over. Let this church return to truth." The choir didn't sing. The music didn't swell. There were no shouts of amen, only footsteps. Curtis walked out the side door alone. The sun outside was still hot, bright and unbothered. But inside, the spell had broken. Tamara sat down on the front pew, not because she was weak, but because she needed a second to feel the ground again. Her aunt sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her like gospel. The guests started filing out, slower than they came in. Whispers chased them like shadows. Outside, the heat danced on the pavement. The wind shifted slightly, carrying the scent of crushed flowers and something else. Truth set free. And in that quiet hour, someone said softly, like a line from an old folk tale, "You can dress up a fox in linen and lace, but the chicken coop still knows when danger's inside." Chapter 6. What the fire burned away. The next morning, Baton Rouge felt quiet in a way the city rarely did, like the whole place was holding its breath out of respect. The church stood still, its gold and white ribbons fluttering in the breeze, now faded and limp. The parking lot was mostly empty. A crushed bouquet sat on the sidewalk like a leftover promise nobody wanted to pick up. Tamara didn't sleep that night. Not really. She lay on her childhood bed staring at the ceiling fan as it spun slow circles, replaying every word, every touch, every moment with Curtis that now felt like somebody else's memory. Her mama's old Bible lay on her chest, unopened. She just needed the weight of it. Like maybe it would anchor her to something that still felt real. By noon, folks in the neighborhood had already started whispering. You know how black folks are. Ain't no news faster than church news. Some called her brave. Some called her foolish. A few said they saw it coming. But most just kept saying the same thing. That girl dodged a bullet. But to Tamara, it didn't feel like a dodge. It felt like she got hit, just not where anybody could see the wound. Around 3 o'clock, she walked barefoot onto the back porch. The sky was pale blue, the kind that looks soft but holds heat. She sipped iced tea that had gone watery and warm. Elder Morris pulled into the driveway slow, like a man coming to deliver truth, not comfort. He climbed the steps and sat beside her without a word. They watched the wind stir the trees. Finally, he said, "You strong." She didn't answer, just looked out across the yard. He tried again. "You know, I asked God why he let you get that close to a lie, why he didn't stop it earlier." She turned to him, eyes still dry. "And what did he say?" Morris shrugged. "Nothing I can quote from Scripture, but in my spirit. I felt this. Sometimes he lets you walk through fire, not to burn you, but to burn away everything that was never meant to stay." Tamara nodded slow. "Well," she said, "it burned." Later that week, she returned to St. Gabriel, not for service, just to sit. The sanctuary was empty, the air cool and still. The flowers were gone, but the faint smell of lilies still clung to the walls. She walked to the front pew and sat alone, her fingers tracing the grooves in the wooden bench. For the first time in days, she closed her eyes and whispered a prayer. Not for a man, not for love, not even for healing. She prayed for discernment. Across town, Curtis was seen boarding a Greyhound heading west. No bags, no suit, just jeans, a hoodie, and a face that looked older than it had the week before. Nobody said goodbye. Nobody stopped him. He didn't run this time, he just left. Weeks passed. Tamara didn't rush back into life. She let it come to her, soft and slow. She returned to the library. She picked up her community work again. She started writing, letters to herself, prayers she didn't know how to speak out loud. And sometimes she'd reread the vows she wrote, not out of bitterness, but to remember the kind of love she still believed in. Because she did still believe, not in fairy tales, not in polished men who talk too smooth, but in real love, the kind that stands in truth, not illusion, the kind that doesn't need a title to be worthy. One Sunday afternoon, she stood before a room full of teenage girls at the youth center. They were rowdy, distracted, checking phones and whispering until she opened her mouth. "Lemme tell y'all something," she began, her voice calm and full. "Anybody can dress up in a crown, But only a real king stands in truth, and only a real queen knows when to walk away from a pretty lie. The room went quiet. She told them her story. Not all the details, but enough to plant seeds. They listened. And one by one, those girls looked at her not like she was broken, but like she was the fire itself. That night, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops and the sky turned orange like healing, Tamara sat on her porch again. This time, she smiled. Because some fires don't just destroy. Some fires reveal the gold that was always hiding underneath the dust. And that's the thing about truth. It don't always show up early, but when it comes, it burns what's fake and leaves what's real standing strong. That was the story Baton Rouge whispered for a long time after, not about the man who lied, but about the woman who walked through fire and came out whole.